What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. It's where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, you know, every once in a while, I come across a story that, because I have incredible stories on here of people overcoming their nightmares, but then you come across, I've had 3 or 4 of these on the show, where the miscarriage of justice is so incredible, so disturbing, that it takes your breath away. And I've got my guest, Jeff Deskovic, who spent 16 years in prison from the ages of 17 to 32. And that, when I'm talking about miscarriage of justice, this isn't just somewhere that a 30-some-odd-year-old person gets misidentified and goes to prison for rape and murder, and then he's set free. This is a 17-year-old kid, But he's convicted of rape, murder, at that young teenage age, and is exonerated by the Innocence Project of DNA. He is an internationally recognized wrongful conviction expert and founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has freed 14 people and helped pass 6 laws. Jeff serves on the Global Advisory Council of Restorative Justice International and is a key advisory board member of the National Coalition group, It Could Happen to You. He speaks across the country and internationally, makes frequent media appearances, has written hundreds of articles, regularly meets with elected officials throughout the U.S. Jeff has received numerous awards. Jeff co-owns the Recharge Beyond the Bars reentry game. A documentary short about him, Conviction, can be viewed on Amazon Prime. I mean, I can't wait to jump into this story. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lights, looking for a car? Then you spend like 4 or 5 hours in the dealership looking to buy that car. Well, it's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. Negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Jeff Deskovic, how are you? Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me here.
So, you know, Jeff, you and I talked on the phone, and I'm always blown away by these type of stories. And then I think the most encouraging thing is that I get to speak to somebody who survived it, made it through the other side. It didn't break you, even though it was incredibly unjust. But Jeff, can you take us back a little bit into your world as a kid growing up, mom, dad, siblings? What was life like for you before your nightmare?
Sure. So I lived with my mother and grandmother in Peekskill, which was a suburb in Westchester County, New York. Population approximately 25,000 people. And and I had a brother that was 3.5 years younger than I was. So I would kind of say back then, I really didn't think of it this way, but I realized in hindsight, I kind of lived a double life. I mean, there was my life in school, there was my life out of school. So in school, I was quiet. I was to myself. The kids were a little bit older than me. I wasn't familiar with them. So I was, kind of on the fringes of the high school society. Mm-hmm. Now, after school, on the other hand, I was closer to the all-American kid. I mean, I was, very popular with all the kids that lived in the apartment complex and the surrounding areas. And generally speaking, whatever I would suggest that we would do would usually be what we would do. We're going to play kickball, basketball, stickball. We're going to play tackle football with no pads on the grass. We're going to swim. We're going to do Monopoly, video games, bike ride, you name it. We did it, and usually at my suggestion.
So that sounds like you were a leader in your neighborhood and also had kind of a normal neighborhood experience. The whole, I'm an 80s kid, of growing up, I was born in 67, but, as you grew up in grade school and so on, it was all about the neighborhood, playing the games in the neighborhood, hanging out in the neighborhood, coming home when it's time to eat dinner. So, Jeff, what led, at 17 years old, you would have been, when this happened to you, I don't know if you were 16 or 17 when this happened, but.
Well, I was 16 when the arrest happened.
16 when the arrest happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you lead us through what happened when that nightmare happened, how it happened?
Yeah, sure, of course. So the year was 1990, and a classmate of mine who I barely knew, Angela Correa, was a immigrant from Colombia. She had been in the country for about a year and a half, leading a very sheltered life, as I came to learn later. She really never went anywhere unless she was accompanied by her older sister or her parents. She was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was pretty much the extent of it. We weren't even really on a high-buy basis. And, she went missing on November 15th, 1989, and a couple of days later, her body was found naked from the waist down. She had been murdered and raped. I got on the police radar because they interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police they might want to speak with me because I didn't quite fit in. So that got me on their radar.
What did you mean by that, Jeff? You didn't quite fit in. What was
what I alluded to earlier? The kids were a little bit older than me,
yeah,
and I wasn't familiar with them, so I was kind of like on the fringes of the society in the high school.
Yeah. Were you picked on in high school? Was it kind of like
a little bit
of that? Yeah.
A little bit of that. Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so they say, hey, you need to talk to this guy. He seems a little bit outside of the realm to us of whatever. So what do? They come to your house, or how does this happen to a kid?
They intercepted me on my way to the high school. I lived across the street from the high school.
Okay.
There were really only two ways to get to the high school from my up from the apartment building where I lived at, and only one. I would have really had to have gone out of my way to use the second of those two ways. So it would have been very obvious to the cops which way I was going to use, and so they intercepted me on the street, on halfway up the street to the high school.
And they say, hey, Jeff, we'd like to talk to you. We got some questions for you.
Correct. And I said, and they told me it was about the Correa murder. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. And they said, well, we'd like you to come to the station and be helpful anyway. And I again said, well, I don't know anything about it. I don't see how I could possibly be helpful. But they wanted me to go anyway. And at some point I agreed. Did
you talk to anybody, Jeff, like your mom or any of your friends or anything about this?
Well, after the initial time with the police I did, after that I went back to the school. I spoke to some of the school officials. I called my mother. I spoke with her, and they didn't want me to speak with him anymore. But how
long did you talk to him at the first the first go-in? How long were you with the police at the police station?
From up until around like 2 o'clock, from maybe 9 in the morning to 2.
Yeah.
But after that, I mean, look, the police knew that my mother didn't want me to speak with them, but I didn't quite understand the basis for her concern.
Yeah.
Thought, the cops are a friend. I didn't do anything.
Right.
They're saying I could be helpful. What could possibly go wrong? But half the time they would talk. Well, I want to mention one other thing. Another factor, follow-up factor beyond just the suggestion from the high school was that I was a sensitive teenager, and this was my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction, and the police thought that was suspicious considering I barely knew the girl. And then they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that, and so it was like a reinforcing factor. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time they would speak to me like I was a suspect, and the other half the time when they pushed too hard, I'd try to get away from them. They would pretend like they needed my help to solve the crime.
Did you have
So
any representation, Jeff, at the time with an attorney?
I did not.
No,
No.
so you're just this young kid that's going back and forth with police officers, 16 years old, thinking that you're being the guy that's helping because you believe in the system and want to do whatever you can to help.
Right. Plus, my dad was never involved in my life in any aspect, and that intersected with the good cop, bad cop routine that they did. And I began in time to look up to the officer pretending to be my friend as a father figure.
Sure.
So eventually they said, look, we got some new information in the file. We want to share that with you. That'll allow you to be more helpful to us. But we need you to take and pass the polygraph test first. So the next day, instead of going to school, I went to the police station for the test. Instead of giving me because it was a school day, my mother and grandmother thought I was in school. But instead of giving me the test at the police station, they drove me 40 minutes away by car to the town of Brewster, which was in Putnam County, New York, which means I can't leave anymore on my own. I don't know where I'm at. I have no money. I have no independent way of leaving.
What was your feeling about taking a polygraph? I mean, would you have known at 16 years old? I mean, did that make you nervous? Did that, like, the whole idea of a polygraph test is not something that everybody does. So, a 16-year-old kid, what was your thoughts about that being something they were going to test you with?
I was frankly excited about it because they said, look, they're going to give me some new tip that they have, and I'm going to be more helpful to them. And they also said, look, you passed the test, they could stop focusing in on me and let's focus on getting the actual perpetrator. So I was excited about it. The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. But he was dressed in civilian clothes. He never identified himself as law enforcement. He never read me my rights. I never had any idea he was law enforcement. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. They gave me a 4-page brochure which explained how the polygraph worked, but had a lot of big words in it that I didn't understand. But I figured, well, I'm here to help the police. What does it matter? Mm-hmm. Let's just get on with it. And from there, he put me in a small room. He gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous. And then he attached me to the machine. And then he launched his third-degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. Mm-hmm. And my fear increased in proportion to the time I was there. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours.
Wow.
And towards the end, he said, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it. And that really shot my fear to the roof. And at that point, the officer who had been pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, that he was holding them off, that he couldn't do so indefinitely, that I had to help myself. And then he said, look, just tell them what they want to hear. You can go home afterwards. You're not going to be arrested. So being young, naive, frightened.
Just wanted to get it over with.
Just wanted to get it over with. I took the out which he offered, and I made up a story based on the information which he had given me in the course of the 6.5 to 7 hours. And in the 6 weeks run up to that, and by the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor in a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. The interrogation was not videotaped.
That's what I was going to ask you, if they had taped any of that.
No video, no audio, no signed confession, just their word for it. And later on, we get to that part of the story. When we came to the trial, they left the threat and false promise out of their story.
And a lot of times, I mean, they didn't do this with you, but a lot of times somebody will take a polygraph test and they'll tell them they failed and they didn't fail because they don't have to tell them the truth. And in your case, they just ramped up all kinds of different things to intimidate you. And the time period that's got to be an incredible, intense time for you to go through, 7 hours of testing and sitting in a chair and being interrogated. Basically, I can't imagine what was going through your mind. And when, I'm sure you were wondering, like, when is this going to be over?
I was wondering when it was going to be over. I mean, it was overwhelming emotionally and psychologically. I was in fear of my life because the fact that I didn't know where I was and that I knew that no one else knew where I was either, that loomed quite large in my mind. And the possibility of harm, this false life preserver that he threw to me, and
and your age. They knew your age. They knew what they were working with, and took advantage of that. Okay, so the next step of this whole nightmare is that you get arrested.
I went to trial. Then I went.
Well,
to trial.
but in the course of this, though, as far as what's going on around you, your parents, your mom, your grandmother, what's happening with you make this phone call and tell them, listen, Mom, I've been arrested for this and I need help. What happens next?
Well, like you said, I called. I spoke to her on the phone, and I frankly felt pretty stupid to even call her and tell her, because all along, she had told me. Well, she had told me before that she didn't want me speaking to the police, but of course I knew better than she was, except that I didn't.
Yeah.
So that was definitely in my head, and I was somewhat in shock also. My mother was surprised. She never.
Did you tell her immediately, Jeff, that you had confessed?
No, I didn't. No, I did not tell her that. No, but I repeated the same lie that the cops told me, which was that they told me I wasn't going to be arrested. So
yeah.
I guess I was still kind of clinging to that, even though I had already been arrested.
Even though you'd been arrested. So how long do they hold you?
Was there at that point? There was nothing else. From
that point forward, are you ever released?
Yeah, after about 35 days in the county jail, which was very difficult, very, very, it was a frightening experience. I made a suicide attempt while I was in the jail as well. Eventually, I was bailed out. My mother had been in a 20-year relationship with a local businessman who had some assets, frankly, and he was willing to, put property up that he had inherited from his mother and his bank book, and I got bailed out. And I thought that I would be going back home to my all-American life, at least after school, but shortly after being released, it was clear that there would, as it would turn out, there was never going to be any going back to that. First of all, the school wouldn't allow me to go back to school while the case was pending. I was a hated figure in Peekskill. I felt it was dangerous to walk around in the street. None of my friends was willing to play with me. Anymore. Either from hating me or else their parents wouldn't. Well,
sure. They're probably taking the complete narrative of whatever's out there.
Sure.
And
right.
whatever's out there was scary.
Correct. And that was all facilitated by newspaper reports of a confession.
Sure.
So I ended up, I thought my life was over. So I took a bottle of extra strength Tylenol, been unopened, and I took all the pills and I went to sleep, and intending never to wake up again. Except that I did. I couldn't stop vomiting, and eventually I had to tell my mother and grandmother what I did, and they called for medical attention. I had had my stomach pumped out, and ultimately I was involuntarily hospitalized for 6 months. The doctors weren't willing to sign, at one facility weren't willing to sign off that I was okay. They were worried that what if something happened, and then what would the repercussions be for them? So
sure.
That turned into 6 months, although it didn't need to be that long. Eventually I got transferred to a different facility where, the doctors had some confidence in their own prognostication abilities. And I was, and I was released. And at some point after that, I turned 17, and a couple of months after that, the trial commenced. So I went from thinking my life was over and starting to realize what happened to eventually buying into the narrative as told to me by various members of my family that, look, you're saying you're innocent. We believe you. The system, you're going to be found not guilty. You didn't do it. They don't have anything on you, and, this is all going to be okay. It's just a difficult time period. So at some point in time, I came to embrace that narrative because, again, that's all that there was.
What did you feel like as far as your defense attorney?
I felt confident because there was a DNA test result which showed that seminal fluid was found in and around the victim, and that didn't match me, and that hairs on the body were found in and around me. In and around the victim, which didn't match me. We had heard through the rumor mill that, the public defender I had been assigned was considered to be their best trial lawyer. And so we felt confident. And at the same time, the environment, speaking to the environment, it definitely was a trial that took place in the middle of a media storm. I mean, it was, every time I went to court, it was a big media moment. Virtually all the coverage was from a guilt presumptive oriented perspective, other than one article. So it was very scary. It was an out of control feeling. But within that out of control feeling and within being nervous, I still had confidence. I didn't understand what my attorney's strategy was going to be, but when I remember, I have a vivid memory when I asked him, and he basically said, "Look, I'm the lawyer, you're not. You already thought you knew more than adults already once, and you see what that got you. Why don't you just sit back and let me do my job?" And so that was the end of any inquiry on my part. I couldn't argue with that logic.
Yeah.
I understood what was going on in the court, but only to some extent.
So how did that go? The courtroom and the vibe,
so
and
the
the whole.
the DNA didn't match me. That was good. The hair didn't match me. That was good. The prosecution got the medical examiner to commit perjury, to commit fraud. He claimed that he said that he forgot to document. He remembered that he forgot to document medical findings that he claimed showed that the victim was promiscuous, which is what gave the prosecution, look, she was sleeping around. In fact, she even slept around on the day you murdered and raped her. That's why the DNA doesn't match you, but you're still guilty. And then he took that a step further and named another youth by name that he claimed had slept with the victim, but he never tried to support that. He never had a DNA test result performed. He never even called him as a witness to give verbal testimony to that effect. He just made the unsupported argument to the jury. My lawyer allowed him to get away with that. My lawyer should have never represented me because of a conflict of interest, because this other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim was represented by another member of that same public defender office. So that prevented us from asking him for a DNA test. It prevented us from calling him as a witness. He literally asked no questions of the medical examiner. He said to him, he stood up in court and he said, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you."
Wow.
He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that proved the confession was coerced and false. He rarely met with me. When I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me, "Look, I don't care if you're guilty or innocent." He never interviewed or called my alibi as a witness. I told him I was playing wiffle ball at the time that the crime happened. There were some irregularities in the trial. In general, polygraph test results are not admissible because it's not scientific, right, and it's prejudicial.
Right.
But the judge created a backdoor rule. He said, well, because this alleged confession happened while you were being polygraphed, I'm going to allow the polygraphist to testify. And he repeatedly told the jury that I lied when I denied committing the crime. My lawyer was barred from asking him any questions on the methods that he used to arrive at his opinion. The victim's clothes, including her bra, had been entered into evidence by the prosecution. The jury asked to see the bra, and that was important because that intersected with one of the statements that was coerced out of me, in which I said that I ripped her bra off. It was when they asked to see the bra that the judge said that the clothes, including the bra, had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that apparently the janitors thought it was garbage, and so they threw it out, and so it was available. He refused to grant a mistrial. He refused to strike testimony about the bra. And what he did do was he substituted for the bra, he substituted a photo in which he said that you can almost see the bra in the photo. I wanted, when you defend a case where there's a false confession, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain that
Right.
confession. You have to
Right.
disprove the confession in as many ways as you can. You bring it all together in your closing argument, except that my lawyer didn't do any of that. Sometimes he told the jury I never confessed. At other times, he argued that I did confess but was coerced. And at still other times, he was arguing that it was a false confession. He wouldn't allow me to testify. He said, look, it ain't my job to prove you're innocent. They got to prove you're guilty. I didn't think that happened. That's a very naive way to practice law. Lastly, I know you want to get in a second. I just want to share one more thing.
Oh, this is good, Jeff. You're making my job easy. You're telling the whole thing.
So the last thing is on the third day of the jury deliberation, they sent out a note. They asked if we can't make a verdict, we can't come, and the verdict has to be unanimous. If we can't come up with a verdict, are we going to be kept sequestered over the Christmas holiday? And the judge said yes.
Oh, man.
And I learned many years later that at that point, it was 11-1 for a conviction, but there was a holdout juror that thought I was innocent, but they were all pressuring him. And when the answer to that note came back, that ratcheted the pressure up, and nobody wanted to be there over the Christmas holiday. And so without being convinced of my guilt, he nonetheless switched his vote to guilty, and I was found guilty.
Wow. Perfect storm of bad.
Yes.
Wow. So, I mean, I just can't believe all the different things that you just said there, Jeff, that just missed each and every opportunity to give you any kind of defense. When all this is over, you come back and they say you're found guilty. What's going through your mind in that moment? I mean, I'm sure at the time you're thinking that things aren't going the way that I want them to go, but you're still hoping that the jury will hold out something for you. Then you find out it comes down guilty of murder, rape. What's in your head? What's swimming around in there when this is that moment?
So to take a half step back, when they announced they reached a verdict, what came in my mind was a jailhouse saying that I had heard from the other prisoners, which said that when the jury has a verdict, try to make eye contact with them. And when they walk in the courtroom, if they're looking at you or they're smiling at you, then that means they found you not guilty. Mm-hmm. But if they look away, if they're solemn, if they look down, if they look stoic or serious, then they've convicted you. Mm-hmm. So I look over at them and they're not making eye contact. They're looking stoic. They're looking, serious and somber, and some of their eyes are down. And then I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. But no, that can't be. I think that the prisoners there just don't know what the hell they're talking about, because I'm innocent, and innocent people aren't found guilty.
Right.
And they read off the first 3 counts, because there was multiple theories of murder. In the first 3 counts, they read not guilty. My mother kind of jumped up, kind of like you might jump up in a sports arena if your team has just scored a touchdown. Mm-hmm. And she's cheering. And, then the next thing, I hear guilty, guilty. When I hear the first guilty, I'm thinking, well, wait a minute.
Right.
Did I just hear that right? Did I miss the word not? Because it can't be that they just said guilty. They had to have said not guilty, mm-hmm. except that I hear guilty again. And then that thought, repeats in my mind. And then there's the third time on that. And then my head just started spinning. And I felt like passing out. I felt an out of control feeling. I felt like I was in some sort of parallel world. Perhaps I was even, having a nightmare, but they said what they did, and, I was taken into custody.
What happens next on your journey?
Well, I go back to court for first in the county jail, the lawyer comes to see me, and I ask him, well, why didn't you call my alibi?
Yeah.
Well, and he gives an answer that really makes no sense. He said, well, that wasn't your defense, and I don't take a shotgun approach to defenses. that really didn't make any sense, because it's not really clear to me what your coherent strategy was, and it's not clear to me how the alibi couldn't have been part of it. I mean, the commonality was all different ways from which, or different vantage points from which, the idea that I was innocent could have been argued.
Absolutely. You would want to put everything out there, every opportunity to show that it wasn't you. Yes.
Correct. So I told him I wanted him to file a motion in the court. You could put a motion in to try to overturn the conviction, at the sentencing hearing before the sentence is pronounced. Mm-hmm. And he told me that he would, but he only said that to placate me. When we actually went to court, he verbally made the motion to overturn the verdict, but he submitted no legal paperwork. He submitted no arguments. And that's one of the grounds that the law provides that the judge can deny it if there's no moving papers.
Right.
So at that point, I stood up for myself, and I pleaded with the judge to overturn the verdict because I'm innocent, and I'm referencing the DNA. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, maybe you are innocent.
Wow.
Which is a striking thing.
Yeah.
But instead of him stepping up for justice, I mean, you would think what logically flows from that is that he would have overturned the conviction, which he could have. Mm-hmm. He could have reversed any number of rulings against me that he made in the course of the trial, including the evidence being thrown out that we talked about earlier.
Right.
But instead of doing that, he took the easy way out, which was to give me a 15 to life sentence, which I was given because I had been charged and tried as an adult, and I was sent to a men's maximum security prison where I would go on to lose 7 appeals.
What was life like for you at 17 years old going into a men's maximum security prison? How did you enter that world?
It was very dangerous. I was scared out of my mind. Half the time I couldn't believe that I was actually there. I would describe it as a nonstop obstacle course featuring the guards, the prisoners, and the civilians as obstacles to the main goal, which is to overturn the conviction and regain your freedom. There was a lot of violence there. There was stabbings and cuttings and gang activity and violence that didn't involve weapons. I was always worried that somebody would discover that I was incarcerated for a sex offense, which could serve as motivation on the prisoner's part to assault me, because it was a vigilante mentality where people are convicted of sex offenses. There were several times in the course of my incarceration, maybe like 5 or 6 times, where I was beat up. One time I nearly lost my life. I got hit on the side of my head with a 5-pound weight plate. The food was terrible. Sometimes the food was burned. Other times it wasn't fully cooked, and it wasn't unusual for the same items to be served out three or 4 times.
So what?
I want to relate one thing, because we're mentioning this interview is drawing out a lot of dramatic things, and I want to share something. And maybe it's healing for me to do so also at the same time. I remember after I arrived in Elmira, I'm 17 years old, and the guards asked me, well, do you want protective custody? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, what's that? Mm-hmm. And well, you might feel that your life is in danger and because of your charges. And the only way we could protect you is if you sign up to go in this custody. I mean, well, what would that look like? Well, you'd be in your cell 23 hours a day. You wouldn't go to recreation. You wouldn't go to programs. Your rec would be 1 hour a day by yourself for you to watch TV, take a shower, use the phone, but you wouldn't be harmed. And then really that's the only way we can protect you. Other than that,
did they offer you that, Jeff, because of your age, or what was the offer?
It was because of the charge and because of the age. It was both factors.
Yeah.
And so, look, I'm not used to being in a cell. I can't handle being in a cell. And so my line of reasoning, I remember thinking, it went through my head rather vividly. I thought to myself, well, I can't believe I'm here. I'm already doing a life sentence, a 15 life sentence. So I'm going to go to the general population, and I'm going to take my chances. And if somebody kills me, well, I guess I don't need to worry about the rest of the sentence.
The rest of the sentence is not.
Correct. So, that was what that was.
So, and you said you got hit on the side of the head with a weight plate. What caused that issue? Because the prisoners there thought I was a sex offender, and I was in a different prison that had a high concentration of old timers, and that whole
vigilante mentality, or people convicted of sex offenses, is really thoroughly ingrained in their mindset, unlike the newer prisoners that knew of that but mostly didn't subscribe
Right.
to that theory.
So, Jeff, I know there's all kinds of different ways to do your time. And, the people who watch different prison movies, I think one of the things that really stuck with me is Shawshank Redemption. Is you get busy living, you get busy dying. At what point in your prison sentence are you engaged in trying to get out of there by engaging through the litigation and motions and that? Is that day one or?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's day one. One of the old timers said to me, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but you've got a lot of time and you need to go to the law library and learn about the law and fight your case and give your lawyer suggestions, and that resonated with me because by that point, I realized that I had received a terrible defense. And so I didn't trust lawyers to defend me anymore on their own, unmonitored and without me being proactive. So I used to go to the law library and learn the law and give suggestions. And I would read articles about other people who were exonerated and learn, who helped them, what routes did they take. I took advantage of the educational programs they had. I got the GED. I learned to type. I took computer repair, general business, which pertains to the application of the computer in the workplace. I took a painting. I took classes on how to tutor adults. I worked as a teacher's aide for a year and a half. 2 different times I worked for a year and a half, helping other prisoners work towards taking the GED and even a pre-GED. And I also wound up working in like food. When I eventually took everything that there was to take that had any kind of value to it, like I didn't think it made any sense to work, for example, as a janitor or doing some other job that in one way or another had
wanted to better yourself in some form or fashion. Yeah, makes sense.
Correct. I then went to food service and, I worked in a lot of different capacities there. At one point, getting the top position, it was kind of analogous to being a CEO and a manager all at once.
I can identify with that, Jeff, because I was when I was at Leavenworth and we had a big food warehouse because we had the USP and we had the camp, so there was 2,200 people and 400 were at the camp, but the other was, so we had a lot of food, and that was one of the things that really helped me knock down my time. I learned how to drive a forklift. I got forklift certified. I was the clerk, so I inventoried everything. We grew this huge garden out there, and that food it was 100,000 pounds of produce that we were giving out to those things in prison. Strangely enough, you really made me think back. That's the kind of stuff that also eats your time in different ways. If you think that you are doing something productive enough that you feel like maybe you're on the outside, you're learning things, you're doing things. So as you're working through your case, when what time period is it in your sentence when you start seeing positive things happen? And when does the connection come from with the Innocence Project, and how does that all come about?
Sure. So let me add one other quick thing on terms of the time. I in 1998, I had like an intervention. One of the prisoners who was a librarian, after I've been coming for like a year, I guess he finally felt comfortable enough. He said, look, why are you wasting your time with these fiction books? I get it. It's entertainment.
It's an escape, a mental escape.
Why don't you do the same thing while learning something? And so I switched to nonfiction books, and another part of my routine. I wrote letters looking for help in the prison, but, when I would burn out, that's when I would read, the nonfiction books. And so I would read 3 or 4 books a week. I engaged in an elaborate delusion when I would play basketball or chess or ping pong. Chess I learned to play in prison. I would pretend like I was a professional player, and so were the other people. But it wasn't like kids fooling around on the sandlot someplace. It was that I needed to leave the prison mentally, and I'm not going to my prison. I wasn't going to my prison assignment in the morning, and my prison assignment, I'm going to school. I'm going to work. The usage of euphemisms. It's not. It's the correction officers. It's not the guard. It's not the warden. It's the superintendent. And and when they allowed us to purchase a black and white TV, my TV stayed off for the most part because I was writing letters and reading. But I would nonetheless watch certain weekly programs, and I would pretend like, well, I'm visiting with friends because I'm having, very sporadic visits. My mother was the only one that consistently came to see me, but in the last 6 years, I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months. So I had just as many missed visits where she was going to come but didn't as I did actual visits. Several sets of aunts and uncles, they'd come, disappear for 3 years, come, disappear. My brother came 3 times in 16 years, not at all in the last decade. And my grandmother passed away while I was in prison. So for most intents and purposes, though not literally in its entirety, I essentially did the time on my own. Mm-hmm. Now, turning to your question, so in my mind, I wasn't doing a 15 to life sentence. I thought I just had to hold on for a year or two till the next appeal would be decided, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still believed in the system. Mm-hmm. So I lost 7 appeals. That took me through 11 years. I remember the appellate division, they ruled I wasn't in custody, so I was free to come and go. Which didn't make any sense. They wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which makes even less sense because the DNA doesn't match me.
Right.
They knocked out all like 7 or 8 of my other issues. There was a total of 10 issues raised. They knocked 7 or 8 of them out in one sentence by writing that they looked at the rest of my issues and found them either to be without merit or not preserved for review. They ruled against me 5-0 on that, and it was all downhill from there. The re-argument motion was denied in one word, denied. The Court of Appeals, New York's highest court, you have to get permission to appeal to them. It's discretionary on their part. They decided not to give me permission to appeal to them. I lost in federal court because my lawyer was given the wrong information by the court clerk pertaining to the filing procedure. And as a result of that, my petition arrived 4 days too late, which the then district attorney of Westchester, Janine Pirro, her office took the position that those 4 days were prejudicial to the government, and therefore the court should simply rule I was late without ever reaching my issues, which is what the court did. Now the case is only about the procedural issues. It's not about the issues I'm arguing. So I appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals, where I got permission to appeal to them on the procedural issues. And my lawyer argued that this was not a delay caused by me or my attorney, but by the court clerk, that to uphold the ruling like that would cause a miscarriage of justice to continue, and that reversing the procedural ruling would open the door for more sophisticated DNA testing. So once again, the district attorney opposed, but the judges, which included Rosemary Pooler and future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, they signed off on that prior decision. They upheld that prior decision. And then my lawyer asked them to reconsider it, and they requested all the judges on the circuit hear the case and vote on it. But those same 2 judges denied the re-argument motion, and then the U.S. Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal. So now I'm out of appeals.
You're out of appeals. Yeah.
And there's no more lawyer. Since you're not litigating anymore, there's also no more lawyer. The only way I'm back in the court at that point is if there's a retroactive change in the law, or else if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence that would probably have led to a different decision. So I had no money. My family had no money to hire an investigator, an attorney, hence a letter writing campaign. I wrote an uncountable amount of letters for about 4 years, not just law firms and nonprofit organizations that do this type of work, but places of worship. And look, if I could come up with a line of reasoning, if I could come up with an action that somebody could take, which could set in motion a chain of events that culminated into my getting the representation I needed, I wrote the letter and tried. So I wrote an uncountable amount of letters for about 4 years, rarely getting responses other than the occasional no. And then I went to the parole board, where in large part because I maintained my innocence and I didn't take responsibility, and largely based on that, they
They would have
denied me,
denied you, sure.
and they ordered me to appear in front of them. Now, at this point, I got 15 years in already now. And with the parole board denial, I served an additional year out of the 2 that they ordered me to do before the next appearance. Now, one of the letters that I
you're no longer a teenager anymore. You're in your 30s.
No, I'm 30. I'm 31 now.
Yeah.
So I'm continuing to write letters, and one of the letters works. At one point, at some point, it became difficult for me to come up with new ideas as to who else to write, what line of reasoning. And so I began to go to the general library for ideas on who to write, connecting that to the legal. And I saw this book. It was called Chicken Soup for the Prisoner's Soul. And I saw that it had many chapters from many different books, and it had author bios in the back. And about half the author bios had a method of a mailing address.
Wow.
So I'm like, I need to borrow that book. I want that book. And so one of the people that I wrote there was an author named Tekla Miller, who had wrote one page of her book called The Warden Wore Pink, which was about her memoirs of serving as a warden in a maximum security prison in California, obviously as a woman. Mm-hmm. So I thought, this is somebody that likely in their walk of life has either run across someone that can help me or is likely to do so in the future. So I wrote the letter to her in care of the publishing company, but someone at the publishing company instead sent the letter to an investigator named Claudia Whitman, and she wrote me right away. When I sent her the test results, she was immediately convinced of my innocence. She had never before saw a case where there was a DNA exclusion and yet a conviction has resulted. So she brainstormed with me. She gave me ideas. She attempted to get people to take my case. One of the ideas she gave was the winning one. She said, write the Innocence Project. And I said, yeah, but I wrote them already. And, they had denied me because back then their method of taking cases was take a case where DNA testing could potentially demonstrate innocence, but we want there to have been no prior testing in it. And obviously that wouldn't apply to me because there had been prior testing. And then if the testing would exclude the client, they would just present that evidence to the court under the newly discovered evidence legal theory.
Right.
Obviously wasn't available because it wouldn't have been newly discovered. It was in front of the jury already. Mm-hmm. So she told me, well, look, the DNA data bank has been created. So the prior denial is irrelevant. That could constitute to something new. Mm-hmm. Maybe maybe the DNA would identify the actual perp. Maybe
the person's actually did the crime. Right.
Right. Maybe he did it again, got caught, and his DNA is in the data bank. Mm-hmm. So I wrote them. Then I forgot about. I filled out their questionnaire. Then I forgot about it, and I looked for other ways of getting representation, none of which worked. Simultaneous to that, Ms. Whitman got other legal professionals to also lobby them to take my case. And then I got lucky also that one of the intake workers, Maggie Taylor, who was not a lawyer, when the Innocence Project declined to take the case again, because of the pre-existing exclusion, she represented my case a second time. And when they said no again, she presented it a third time. She got it across the third time using a theory I had shared with her, which was the DNA data bank. So they agreed to represent me, and that was the first of 3 keys. Mm-hmm. Second key was that Pirro left office. Her successor was not as dug in. And as I understand it, through the grapevine, neither one of them liked each other. And Pirro was in the middle of running for Attorney General, and I think her successor was hoping that I would be exonerated so that it could damage her run for AG. So, but however you get there, I'll take it. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank.
Huge.
Because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing the victim in my case.
See, that's one of the things I was wanting to bring up with you getting there. That's the real consequences of of a really bad thing happening when these police officers coercing, yes, there's some high fives and maybe some promotions at the time that they've solved this crime. But what they've really done is they put somebody else's life in jeopardy that actually lost their life because they didn't actually go after the person who really created the crime. which is huge. You know, not only was your life affected dramatically, but someone else lost their life.
Correct. And you know, the murder victim there, Patricia Morrison, who was killed, she was a school teacher, so she was contributing to society in a meaningful way. And she also had two children who, you know, now lost their mother. So on September 20th, 2006, my conviction was overturned. I was released. That was in the agreement between the defense and the district attorney's office. I went back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all charges were dismissed on actual innocence grounds. The actual perpetrator, when confronted with the DNA evidence, he confessed. He was subsequently arrested and convicted. Then a study was completed and released by 4 experts that had been commissioned by the district attorney to issue a report on what went wrong with my case. And I was then free to go to try to, you know, rebuild my life as best I could, except that it got quite difficult.
Wow. You just said a lot there, Jeff. That time period where you had the Innocence Project, you got the DNA test, you got all this done, and he was in the DNA data bank. That when you hear that you are released, you're exonerated, and you're going to be freed. What, after, I forget how many years this has been now.
You're 16.
16 years. What was going through your mind about how you were going to re-enter the world? I'm sure there was euphoria. Thank God somebody finally, now everybody knows I was innocent. That whole feeling that you've been carrying with you for 16 years and longer, because he was really 16 years old when what was going through your world?
So my lawyer came to see me on a surprise visit. And, you know, by this point, having lost 7 times, you know, often on technical and procedural ways, my antennas are up. I'm looking for the slightest indication that anything may be off, because that often has spelt disaster.
Yeah.
So my lawyer said, well, the items have been tested. And I said, well, what do you mean they've been tested? They're not supposed to be tested for another month. And she said, no, the DA pulled some strings and the items have been tested. The results match the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow.
Wow.
And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, yes, I am. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, yes, I am. I said, no, I'm not. And I had a 3.5 hour worth of mental paralysis. My head was spinning. My lawyer had to literally hold my hand. Yeah. And I was articulating all these things flashing through my head, none of which had anything to do with my going home, and one thought of which had nothing to do with the next. And it was just kind of like a madman babbling on about, you know, things that made no sense. And every now and then she'd cut in. Every now and then she'd cut in and say, are you ready to talk about tomorrow? I mean, no, look, no, don't. We're not talking about that. You know, someone's got to go pick that up. And that made it real.
All of a sudden, right?
Yeah, and I felt better for 5 minutes. And then a different thought came in my head, which was that, well, actually 2 thoughts came in my head. The first one was that, well, something's going to happen between today and tomorrow, and they're going to change their mind, and they're going to do what they always do, which is fight and win. Mm-hmm. That was one thing. And the other thing, well, somehow the guards are going to find out about it. And, you know, I had heard stories on the wind, you know, where people were supposed to go home, and the day they supposed to go home.
Something happens.
Something happens. The guards plant the shank or a razor, or there's some act of violence, you know, by another prisoner, which calls for somebody to defend themselves. And the next thing you know, they're not going home. So I knew that this was a little bit different because it's legal, not parole. But I still thought that some version of the same theme could take place. So
I can't. Before we get to that, because I want to get into that whole reentry process and how hard that is. Before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor. Nightmare Success Podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white-collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you that this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, okay, they go get your stuff, Jeff, and they get your clothes, and you put your clothes on. You know you're leaving. Tell us about reentry.
Sure. I'm going to steal a minute and just tell a quick story. I'll
Yes,
be super brief.
Please do.
So I had divided. So I remember the story. When I first got to Elmira, I heard a couple of prisoners talking, and one person said to the other, man, if I win my appeal, it's going to be like somebody in here hit the lottery simultaneously, because I'm going to give that person everything. I'm not taking anything home with me. So that thought crossed my mind, and I decided to live another man's dream. So I put a few limited things in one bag that I was taking with me that I felt were essential, and everything else I loaded up in other bags. And when my cell cracked open to go home, I ran down the gallery, equivalent to running like half a block, and I dumped this big bag of stuff in front of this guy's cell that was just getting started with his time. And he's like, oh my God, thank you. Never mind. Just hurry up and get the stuff and put it in your damn cell, because you're not allowed to give anybody anything. And then I ran back down and brought a second bag, and then I ran a third bag, and then finally the guard, Deskovic, what the F are you doing up there? Get your ass down here. No, I'm coming. So I get my stuff. I come downstairs, and they're bringing me over to the pack up room to itemize my things, and I'm waving to people and this and that. And
you've grown up there.
What's that?
You've grown up there.
I've grown up there, right? And then they take my picture, give me an ID, and I'm ready to then get in the vehicle and leave. And then this guard comes up to me, and he's holding like shackles and chains. I'm like, well, what are you doing with that? Mm-hmm. I'm going to court to go home. You guys know I'm going home. Mm-hmm. That's why you gave me a release from a temporary ID. And the officer told me the last thing in the world I wanted to hear. He said, well, the judge might change the mind, and so you might not be going home. So we gotta follow these protocols. And that's when a different guard said, well, don't worry about it, Mr. Deskovic. Just this is going to be the last time you're ever going to be in chains the rest of your life. Just go along with it. Don't make an issue now. So I common sense prevailed, and I did. I remember as I was driven to the courthouses from in Ossining, New York, we're going to county courthouse, White Plains, New York, same county. So I had previously walked the streets of Ossining, as a youth. It was the next couple of towns over, and I saw streets and buildings and houses that I remembered, and I was kind of marveled at the juxtaposition of me in custody, albeit temporarily, just a few feet of steel separating me from people walking on the sidewalks, other people in cars, and how they were totally obvious to my presence or situation. I remember that. I remember there was a guard in the holding area of the courthouse, and he wanted to know who I was and what I was there for. And the officer who had taken me there explained, and then he said, well, that's why there's all this media here, and that's why I don't believe in the death penalty, because of the possibility of an innocent person being executed. Now, I was waiting for my suit to arrive. I was waiting to speak to Barry Scheck, because my lawyer said that he was going to come back in that area in the morning to talk to me, just to reassure me that everything was okay. But hours are passing by, and there's signs of neither suit nor Scheck. I'm starting to worry. I remember they tried to give me the brown bag lunch with the quarter drink and the bag of chips with mostly air and terrible sandwiches. And I said, I don't want that. I'm going home. I'm going to have a real meal. Yeah. I have to give it to you by law. What you do with it once you get it is on you. So I took the thing just to satisfy him. I put it in a corner. But as hours are passing by, I'm thinking, well, crap, I might need that. I might need that. By the time this thing goes wrong and I get brought back to the prison, after lunch, I know damn well they're not making me nothing different in the mess hall. I'm going to have to wait to dinner time. So I better eat this. So I did. So I did. Finally, the suit shows up. I go inside the court. I see Scheck and my lawyer, and he leans over and says, you're definitely going home today. I spoke to the judge in his chambers. Do you want to make a statement here in the court? Do you want to wait till outside? And I was kind of thrown off balance. I didn't know what to do. And suddenly the judge comes running out. Now, normally, procedure-wise, the case is supposed to come back in front of the same judge that proceeded. Right. Because the theory is that they have some familiarity rather than somebody cold. And he was still on the bench. He hadn't resigned. Mm-hmm. But he ducked the assignment, and the low man on the totem pole got stuck. And I had the distinct impression from the way he rushed in and the way he hurried up and rushed out that this judge really didn't want to have had anything to do with this at all whatsoever, but he was kind of forced on him. Mm-hmm. So my lawyer spoke, the other side spoke and agreed with it. They all basically said the same thing, and the conviction was overturned. And I got up to leave when suddenly the enormity of the moment hit me like a ton of bricks. And I sat back down, and, my lawyers were talking to me, but I was kind of hearing them and not hearing them. My head was spinning, and it took about 20 minutes. At some point, the bailiff cleared the courtroom of everybody, and after about 20 minutes, I was kind of done with that. And I got up and I started to walk towards the exit, the door, and nobody stopped me. And each step that I took, it made it more and more real. There was a bailiff standing at the door, this tall African-American lady, and she was trying to be professional, but I could see the water was running a little bit. And I looked up at her and I made eye contact and I said, "Thank you." And she said, "Good luck." And I went outside the courtroom. I remember, I don't remember a cloud in the sky. It was all blue. It was sunny. Everybody was clapping, lots of the staff and the interns from Cardozo Law School. And, they all had come. It's traditional to cheer when people come out because you've survived. You've overcome the system.
Yeah.
And we had a press conference. And, my first words were, is this really happening? And then everything I had ever wanted to say but could never get anybody to hear me say came out. And just when I thought I was done, another topic came to my head. And I went on for about 2.5 hours off the cuff, and we went to a restaurant to have a celebration. My first meal was mussels with fried diavolo sauce. I had a side of baked ziti. I wanted some Neapolitan ice cream, which they didn't have, but they did have strawberry. And they also you could get combo vanilla and chocolate. So I requested that they put it all together in one bowl, which they did. So I remember I had the spoon and I'm eating, and there was some media, and one person with the camera started taking pictures. So for a half second, I kind of imagined what it might be like if you were famous in the paparazzi.
Exactly.
And so they took those pictures, and then I went to my aunt's house because my mother had moved upstate to Cobleskill, about 3 hours away from there. Brent, I'd love to tell you we had a raucous party that lasted to the wee hours of the morning. I'd love to say that to you. The reality is that there was nobody left to party with. There was no one left to socialize with. I remember I sat around the table with my aunt and my mother and another member of the extended family who hadn't been able to make the court appearance came over. They all had coffee and cookies, and they were talking amongst themselves, but I felt strange and out of place, and I felt unable to communicate with them. And I just went to the outside. I wanted to sit down. My uncle had a little bit of property in his home in Nanuet, and I wanted to sit down. He had a park bench where normally in the prison in the yard, the way Elmira did it when it got dark, they would close the yard. So I wanted to sit outside, and I did. While it was dark, and I took a bath for the first time in 16 years, and that was the extent of it. It was no party. I felt out of place, and for many weeks and months after that, every now and then it would feel strange to me. I felt like a metaphorical tapping on the back of my shoulder. Hey, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. They're all supposed to be out. This is normal for them, but it's not for you. Right. They don't realize you're not supposed to be out here. So I had that thought, and sometimes I had the thought, I guess I was unable to deal with the reality of what had happened to me, what I just overcome. But I had the thought that, none of that actually happened. I wasn't actually in prison. for 16 years. And, I generally had a very difficult time psychologically. I mean, it's normal to have
Sure.
PTSD, panic attacks, fear on seeing law enforcement, a feeling of processing things at a slower speed, a feeling of having been frozen in time. I mean, I was released at 32, but I felt like I was 17 because that was the age I was when I was last free. Culture was different. Technology, GPS, cell phones, internet hadn't been created, so neighborhoods didn't look the same. So cumulatively, it felt like I was in a parallel world, one that I didn't belong in. There was the social stigma. Yeah, I was in prison wrongfully for 16 years, but I was there for 16 years.
Yeah.
So how much that rubbed
Time was
off.
frozen. You did.
Time was right, but is it safe to be around you though? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So that was a factor, and definitely was a hindrance when it came to personal relationships. And it was just lonely as well. And I was always passed over for gainful employment. It seemed like they wanted somebody with job experience and somebody that could hit the ground running rather than some patience for on-the-job training. When I dreamed about being free and was fighting for my freedom while I was in prison, I guess I dreamed about entering society into an idealized life. So I thought I'd live where whatever dwelling I wanted to live, in whatever neighborhood or town I wanted to live. I thought I would work at a job that was something meaningful. I thought I would be making the same amount of money that I would have made had I started entry and worked my way up and was then at the same age as that. I thought about travel and the places I would see on television, advertising vacations and amusement parks and movies. And I would think about doing all those things. And I never really thought about, well, for it to really be fun, you really need to have people to do it with. I mean, I could be by myself, but I've done that for 16 years. That's not the quality life that I want. So the idea that there wouldn't be people to do it with me never crossed my mind. I never really thought about the financial portion of that. Things aren't free. So it was a very difficult, with my 5 years of freedom. When I was awkward, when I would meet up with members of my extended family who would either never come to see me, or had rarely come to see me. So that was very awkward, and I had to work through some emotional things with that. That took a while, but we're in a good place now. But it was hard. There was kind of a collective guilt that each person felt because my mother made rounds 2 or 3 times, was trying to get everybody to contribute a manageable amount of money to combine to hire the legal services, especially during those years where I was writing Letter to Freedom. And then also that they really hadn't come see me or really hadn't helped on the morale level. So that was, that was difficult also. But at the same time, while I was going through all of that, the light bulb went off when I did the off-the-cuff presentation at the press conference, and I realized I could be an advocate without necessarily being a lawyer. So I got hired as a weekly columnist for an independent paper that let me write pretty much whatever I wanted to write. It was great money, but it was like $300 an article, $250 an article, but it was a weekly paper. So only wanted one article a week. I was making money doing speaking engagements, but it's kind of like being an actor. You only get paid if you get booked, so it really wasn't
right.
a form of income. So someone donated a car to me, but the car mostly stayed parked. Because I was always passed over for gainful employment, I lacked stability of housing. I bounced around from place to place. There was really no way for me to restart my life living with my mother in Cobleskill. I felt like, well, Westchester is where I grew up. Westchester is where everything happened and where everything was ultimately resolved to the extent it could be. So if someone's going to open a door for me and, help me,
place.
It would be the place. It's not going to be some upstate county that has nothing to do with me.
Right.
So, hence, leaving my mother, someone sent me $100. I didn't even know the lady. I just played with her son as a kid, but I had no memory or interaction of her, but she remembered me. So I packed a little bit up and took the train, and my plan was to just visit people, but I lacked the stability of housing. At some point within 4 months, I lost the temporary housing, and so I was a couple of weeks away from a homeless shelter. But Mercy College, which had given me a scholarship, the dean over there, Dean Elkin, it made it into one of the articles, a human interest item associated with my conviction being overturned was that I was within 30 credits of graduating from the bachelor's, but the funding had been cut. Mm-hmm. So she lined up a scholarship with me. So that was kind of an intervention because I was foolishly.
It's a great intervention.
It was, but I was foolishly thinking I was too old to go to college. That ship had sailed.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing anything else. I was kind of floundering around. So I took the offer and I ultimately got the bachelor's degree. I started meeting with the elected officials. And so I began being an advocate while I'm all of these struggles. I got the bachelor's. I didn't get into law school. So I went to grad school. I got the master's degree. I thought that the extra credential, then there was no jobs really for me with the bachelor's. So I figured, let me get
a master's,
degree, get a master's, and maybe the extra credential will make me be a better advocate, and I can see what the job market looks like then. So I got a master's degree. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction cause and reform. After about 5 years, I was financially compensated. The state gave me, settled with me, and I was able to settle with 3 of the 4 defendants of the federal civil rights lawsuit. So I used some of the money I wanted. Up to that point, I had only been able.
Did you get a decent amount of money for that? Because I always think about that as, how much is somebody's life worth? You took their life liberty.
Well, as you know, which is what you're alluding to. But I got a nice amount of money, and I up to that point, I had only been able to nibble on the edges of freeing people. Like I could write about their case in my capacity as a columnist. I could help a lawyer working on a case. I could strategize a little bit with them, give them a few ideas. I could, help get media attention. I could engage in grassroots tactics like pack the courtroom. So I could help and I could just physically show up for the visual effect. Maybe the judge would recognize me because I was in the news frequently. I was trading privacy for awareness. Mm-hmm. So I was hoping, the judge might recognize me and realize I'm supporting this case and decide to take a closer look at that one. Because, often, whether you're going to get an objective ruling has a lot to do with whether somebody will get justice or not, rather than just solely the facts and law. But all that having been said, that was just nibbling on the edges. Mm-hmm. I wanted to directly be involved in it. So it was either, do or die type moment. Either you're serious about this and you're going to go ahead with some of your money, or you're not.
Just jump in the deep end.
So I jumped in the deep end. I put $1.5 million in. I started Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. So far we've gotten 14 people home.
Which is fantastic.
Thank you. We helped to pass 6 laws. I'm part of different coalition groups. And at some point I became not satisfied with sitting in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the defense table. I wanted to represent some of the clients. I wanted to make some of the arguments, hence going to law school, becoming a lawyer, and pursue the dream of exonerating others as a lawyer. Had my first success last December. I served as co-counsel with lead attorney Oscar Michelin. We overturned Andre Brown's conviction after he had been in for 23 years.
That's so great. It's everything you just laid out there is just encouraging to not the, even all the things that you were talking about, the idealistic way of thinking that everything was going to happen this way. And it didn't, but you made it happen the way that you could make it happen. And now I can just tell, Jeff, in your world that you are passionate about what you're doing. You feel good about what you're doing. It took a long time to get there, but right. What a journey it has been. And it makes me think of the question, considering from that 16-year-old kid to where you are now, what do you think's your biggest takeaway through this whole experience to the listeners out there?
Without a doubt, don't give up. And I would say second to that, I've reflected, on my life and the total journey, considering all aspects of it. And I've, think about a meaning to it. I've kind of boiled it all down to this generic formula that is true across the board. It isn't not limited to applying it to wrongful conviction or imprisonment. Have a goal, have a realistic plan,
Mm-hmm.
because who wants to carry out a plan that you don't think is going to win?
Right.
You should be able to look at the plan 3 or 4 different ways and say to yourself at the end, yeah, you know what? This could work.
Mm-hmm.
Be flexible. Remember that the plan is not the goal. The goal is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have to deviate your plan a little bit, then you do that.
Good point. Good point.
Don't be afraid of hard work. I don't believe that things are going to turn out right just because. I don't believe a pie in the sky. I think you have to work your rear end off. And if you do that, you put yourself in a position, then a door may open, then a miracle could occur. But it's going to happen from you working. No excuses. There might be reasons why something is harder for you to do. But if you want it hard and bad enough and you're willing to go all out for it, to leave it all out on the field, to use a sports phrase, I think it can happen. And, never, ever give up.
I love that, because you didn't.
When you feel like, we feel like you're going to give up.
You had turned down 7 times by the whole appeal process, and you didn't give up then. You could have easily rolled up in a fetal position and said, that's it. I'm done.
Right. And then the parole board and all those countless letters too. And when you reach the point where you can't go on no more, and that happened to me a few times, even in my life afterwards, trying to get to law school and the bar, the thought comes in my mind, maybe I'm at the key moment right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe this is when I'm on the verge of having a breakthrough.
This is it. Yeah.
But because I quit, it's not going to happen. But so even though I can't go on anymore, I'm going to do it anyway, just to see what happens on the other side.
Love that.
And then when you get there, reach back for somebody in a similar position and pull them forward. I've seen people work with homeless population, and they used to be homeless. I've seen people that work with those who have had alcohol problems or drug problems, and now they work with that population. I've seen people that went down the wrong life path, ended up in prison. They're now working with at-risk youth. I've listened to women that used to be abused, and now they're helping other women who are victims of domestic abuse. I've even been in the presence of people that have been sexually trafficked, who have nonprofits and otherwise engage in advocacy work towards that population. I see that as applying to
using your experience, and people will believe you because of your experience. And that's why I think what you're doing, Jeff, is so effective and needed and it is impactful. If anybody wants to look up Jeff, there's a lot to read about him. And don't forget I'm going to go check out the thing on Amazon Prime, Conviction. I didn't even know you had that until you sent me the bio. Jeff, what a story, man. I'm so glad that you took the time to share this. I think the listeners are going to get so much out of this. And if they do, don't forget to follow, subscribe, share this to people who need it. And if you're looking for a book out there, I've got one, Nightmare Success. It's on Amazon. If you got time, I know it's a hassle, but those reviews on Apple, they actually help the show. They pump up the volume on it. If you're looking for me, BrentCassidy.com. That's with a TY, not a DY. We spell it wrong. As I used to say to my people when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Oh, and by the way, I want to thank Homestead Financial for letting me use this podcast room here every week. And if you got any home mortgage needs, Greg FDF is definitely your man. Jeff, thanks so much for being on the show and sharing your story. It's going to mean so much to so many people that are looking for their way, and you're giving them actionable steps through your life journey, and it means a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on, Brent. People can follow me on social media. And the last thing, look, my dream is to ultimately have a chapter of the foundation in each state, in each country. I see this as a worldwide, issue. That'll be when we get the public support. So look, the Deskovic Patreon, my crazy dream, what if there was 25,000 people or more who, in order to participate in freeing innocent people, are willing to part with $3 to $5 on a recurring monthly basis? But I need people to share it on social media. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. And I'll put all that in the show notes too, Jeff. Nightmare Success, in and out.